Most people try to learn new skills by pushing harder, repeating more, and staying motivated. Yet progress stays slow and frustration builds. The problem isn't effort, it's that the mind wasn't trained to learn this way. Every skill follows a hidden structure, and when that structure is ignored, learning feels heavy. When it's understood, learning becomes calm, clear, and surprisingly fast. Why most people struggle to learn new skills. Most people believe learning a new skill is mainly a test of effort. They assume that if they repeat something long enough, push themselves harder, or stay motivated, improvement will eventually happen. When progress feels slow, they blame their intelligence, their discipline, or their age. This belief quietly shapes how they approach learning, and it is precisely what keeps them stuck. The common approach to learning looks busy from the outside. Notes are taken, videos are watched, pages are reread, and hours are spent practicing. Yet beneath all this activity, very little changes. The mind is exposed to information, but it is not being trained. Exposure feels productive, but it rarely creates real skill. Most people confuse repetition with understanding. They repeat actions, sentences, or movements, hoping familiarity will turn into mastery. What actually happens is fatigue. The mind memorizes fragments without knowing how they fit together. When something changes slightly, confusion returns and confidence collapses. The learner feels as if they are always starting over. Another hidden problem is motivation-based learning. Many people rely on emotional energy to drive progress. When motivation is high, they feel capable. When it fades, learning stops. This creates an unstable cycle where progress depends on mood rather than method. Skills learned this way never feel solid because the foundation was emotional, not structural. In contrast, skilled learners approach learning differently. They do not begin by asking how hard they should work. They begin by asking how the skill is structured. Instead of flooding the mind with information, they slow down and look for clarity. They focus on understanding what matters, what connects, and what drives progress forward. The difference is not intelligence, it is not talent, it is not even time. The difference lies in how the mind is used. Most people treat the mind like a container to be filled. Skilled learners treat it like a system that must be trained. One approach creates overload, the other creates leverage. This is why so many people feel frustrated when learning something new. They are doing more, but they are not thinking differently. Without structure, effort scatters. Without clarity, practice becomes noise. The mind resists not because learning is hard, but because it is being forced to operate without a map. Once you recognize this, the struggle begins to make sense. The problem was never your ability. It was the method you inherited. And before any skill can be learned faster, the first shift must happen here, from effort without structure to understanding how the mind actually learns. How the mind really learns, not how we were taught. Learning feels confusing for many people because they were taught a false model of how the mind works. From early education onward, learning is presented as exposure. Read this, watch that, repeat until it sticks. The assumption is simple: the more information the mind encounters, the more it will absorb. But the mind does not work like a sponge, it works like a system. The mind learns by building internal structures. Every skill, whether physical or mental, is made of patterns, relationships, and cause and effect links. When these are clear, learning feels fast. When they are unclear, learning feels heavy, no matter how much time you spend. This is why two people can practice for the same number of hours and experience completely different results. Most traditional learning focuses on input: more books, more videos, more practice sessions. This creates the illusion of progress because activity is mistaken for improvement. In reality, the mind is overwhelmed. Without a framework, information remains isolated. It cannot combine, adapt, or transfer to new situations. This is why people freeze when conditions change slightly, even after long practice. Real learning begins when the mind starts organizing information into models. A mental model is a simplified explanation of how something works. It tells the mind what matters and what can be ignored. When a model is clear, new information finds its place quickly. When no model exists, everything feels equally important and nothing stands out. Feedback is another missing element. Many people practice without knowing whether they are improving the right thing. They repeat errors without noticing them. The mind needs signals. It needs to see the difference between what worked and what didn't. Without feedback, practice reinforces confusion instead of correcting it. Clarity completes the process. Learning accelerates when the mind understands why something works, not just how to perform it. Instead of memorizing steps, principles travel. They adapt. They make unfamiliar situations easier to handle. This is why a scientific approach works so well. Scientists do not collect facts randomly. They form explanations, test them, observe results, and refine their understanding. Each cycle strengthens the internal structure. Learning becomes cumulative instead of repetitive. Once this shift happens, learning stops being about endurance. It becomes about precision, and precision is what allows the mind to move forward instead of circling the same ground again. The 5 stages of skill learning the mind must pass through. Every skill the mind learns follows a predictable progression, whether people notice it or not. The problem is that most learners are unaware of these stages, so they move randomly instead of deliberately. When progress slows, they assume something is wrong with them. In reality, they are simply trying to operate at a stage they have not yet reached. The first stage is exposure without structure. At this level, the mind is encountering a skill for the first time. Everything feels unfamiliar, and nothing stands out as more important than anything else. Most people stay here longer than necessary because they mistake familiarity for understanding. They watch, read, or observe repeatedly, hoping clarity will appear on its own. It rarely does. The second stage is basic recognition. Here, the mind begins to notice patterns. Certain actions repeat, certain ideas connect. This stage feels encouraging because confusion decreases slightly. However, many learners rush past it. They want to perform before they understand. When they do, errors multiply and confidence drops. Recognition must stabilize before progress can continue. The third stage is conscious understanding. At this level, the learner can explain what they are doing and why. The skill stops feeling mysterious. Cause and effect become visible. This stage is uncomfortable for many people because it requires slowing down. It demands thinking, not just doing. Yet this is the stage where real acceleration begins, because the mind now has a working model. The fourth stage is controlled application. Here, understanding is tested in real conditions. The learner applies the skill while paying attention to feedback. Mistakes are no longer discouraging, they are informative. Each correction strengthens the mental structure. This stage often feels slower than expected, but it is where adaptability is built. The skill becomes flexible instead of fragile. The fifth stage is integration. The skill no longer demands constant attention. It blends into the learner's thinking. Decisions feel natural. Adjustments happen automatically. At this point, learning speed increases dramatically. Not because effort increased, but because the mind is no longer fighting uncertainty. The structure is complete. Most people struggle because they try to jump from exposure straight to integration. They want results without passing through understanding and controlled application. This creates frustration. The mind resists because it is being asked to perform without support. Skilled learners respect the sequence. They do not rush stages. They recognize where they are and work deliberately within that level. This is what creates the appearance of fast learning. Speed is not the absence of stages. It is smooth movement through them. When these stages are ignored, learning feels chaotic. When they are understood, learning becomes predictable. You stop guessing what to do next. You know where you are, what is missing, and what to focus on. This framework changes how failure is interpreted. Struggle is no longer a sign of inability. It is feedback about the current stage. Confusion means exposure is incomplete. Repeated mistakes mean understanding is shallow. Inconsistency means integration has not happened yet. Each problem points to a specific adjustment. Once the stages are clear, learning regains momentum. Effort becomes targeted. Practice becomes meaningful. Instead of forcing progress, the mind is guided forward step by step. And this is where most acceleration truly begins, because the next question is no longer what to learn, but how to move through these stages without getting stuck in any one of them. Training your mind to move faster through the stages. Once the stages of learning are clear, the next challenge is not effort but efficiency. Most people assume speed comes from pushing harder or spending more time. In reality, speed comes from removing friction inside the mind. When friction is high, even simple skills feel exhausting. When friction is low, progress feels almost automatic. The first way to reduce friction is by slowing down at the right moments. This sounds counterintuitive, but rushing through early stages creates delays later. When the mind skips clarity, it pays the price through confusion and repeated mistakes. Skilled learners pause early to ask simple questions. What is actually happening here? Why does this step matter? What changes if this variable changes? These questions sharpen understanding and prevent wasted effort. Another key factor is precision of attention. Most learners divide their attention across too many things at once. They try to improve everything simultaneously. This creates noise. The mind cannot detect patterns when attention is scattered. Progress accelerates when attention is narrowed to the most important element at the current stage. One clear focus produces more growth than 10 vague goals. Feedback must also be tightened. Many people practice in isolation, guessing whether they are improving. Without feedback, errors repeat quietly. The mind learns whatever it practices, even if that practice is wrong. Skilled learners shorten the feedback loop. They check results frequently. They compare outcomes to expectations. Small corrections made early prevent large problems later. Reflection plays a similar role. Reflection is not overthinking. It is structured review. After practice, the mind needs time to organize what just happened, what worked, what failed. Why? Without reflection, experiences blur together. With reflection, experiences stack. This is how learning becomes cumulative instead of repetitive. Environment matters more than most people realize. Learning accelerates when the environment reduces distractions and reinforces focus. This does not require perfection. It requires intention. The mind adapts to what surrounds it. A noisy environment trains shallow attention. A calm environment trains depth. Even small changes can shift how the mind engages with a skill. Another overlooked factor is emotional pressure. Many learners tie their self-worth to performance. This creates tension. Tension narrows thinking and blocks experimentation. Skilled learners separate identity from outcomes. Mistakes become data, not judgment. This emotional distance allows the mind to explore, adjust, and improve without resistance. Consistency also needs reframing. Many people think consistency means repeating the same action daily. In reality, consistency means maintaining engagement with the learning process, even as the form changes. Some days emphasize understanding, other days emphasize application, others emphasize review. This variation keeps the mind responsive instead of rigid. As these elements come together, movement through the stages accelerates naturally. Exposure becomes intentional, recognition becomes sharper, understanding deepens faster, application becomes more adaptable, integration begins to emerge without force. What once felt slow now feels smooth. This is why grinding harder rarely works. It adds pressure without reducing friction. Intelligent training does the opposite. It removes obstacles so effort can flow in the right direction. Speed becomes a side effect, not a goal. At this point, learning starts to feel lighter. The mind trusts the process. Confusion no longer signals failure. It signals adjustment. And when the mind reaches this state, the final shift becomes possible, turning faster learning from a temporary phase into a permanent way of thinking. Turning fast learning into a permanent mental skill, the final shift in learning happens when speed stops being something you chase and becomes something you trust. At this point, learning faster is no longer a technique you apply occasionally. It is a way your mind operates by default. This is where many people misunderstand what mastery really is. They think mastery means knowing more. In reality, it means thinking differently. Most people treat learning speed as temporary. They search for tricks that work for one skill, then disappear. When the trick fades, frustration returns. This happens because the underlying way of thinking never changed. The mind was assisted, not trained. As a result, each new skill feels like starting over. Permanent fast learning emerges when the mind internalizes structure. Instead of reacting emotionally to difficulty, the mind recognizes patterns. Confusion is no longer threatening. It is informative. The learner understands that confusion points to a missing connection, not a personal flaw. This interpretation alone removes enormous resistance. At this stage, the learner no longer asks, "Am I good at this?" The question becomes, "Which stage am I in?" This shift is subtle but powerful. It keeps the mind grounded. Instead of jumping ahead or giving up, attention returns to the process. Learning remains steady even when progress is invisible. Identity plays a crucial role here. Most people identify as fast learners or slow learners. This creates pressure. Skilled learners identify as system builders. They trust that if the system is correct, results will follow. This identity frees the mind from constant evaluation. Energy is no longer spent on self-judgment. It is spent on clarity. Another marker of permanent learning speed is transfer. When learning is truly internalized, new skills feel familiar. The mind recognizes similarities across domains. Principles repeat. Structures echo each other. What once felt complex now feels navigable. This is not because the skills are simpler, but because the mind is better organized. Reflection becomes automatic at this level. After practice, the mind naturally reviews without force. Adjustments happen quietly. Progress continues even during rest. This is why learning begins to feel lighter. The mind is no longer pushing uphill. It is moving along a path it understands. Patience also changes. Instead of waiting for motivation, the learner waits for clarity. Instead of forcing outcomes, they refine inputs. This patience is not passive, it is precise. It knows when to pause and when to move. Over time, this rhythm becomes stable. When fast learning becomes permanent, effort decreases but results improve. The mind wastes less energy fighting uncertainty. It knows what to look for, what to ignore, and how to respond when something breaks down. Learning becomes predictable instead of emotional. This is the quiet advantage skilled learners carry into every new challenge. They do not rush. They do not panic. They trust the process they have built. And once that trust exists, every future skill becomes easier. Not because the world changed, but because the mind did. Learning faster isn't about pushing harder or collecting more techniques. It's about training the mind to see structure where there was once confusion. When learning becomes clear, effort stops feeling heavy and progress becomes steady. This shift doesn't just change how you learn one skill. It changes how you approach every challenge that follows. If this perspective helped you think differently about learning, consider subscribing for more calm, structured insights like this. And if someone you know feels stuck trying to learn something new, sharing this video could help them more than you expect. Learning becomes easier when understanding leads the way.